After the funeral was over, they all came back to the house like it was a family reunion instead of a burial. I watched from the kitchen window as they pulled into the driveway, SUVs and polished shoes, the scent of perfume too strong for mourning. Someone brought lasagna, another brought lemon bars. I brought silence. No one thanked me for that, but it was the only thing I had plenty of. The house was loud, laughter in low tones, whispered gossip in corners. They were crying, I suppose, just not for the same things I was. They mourned the man they remembered, the father, the uncle, the Sunday griller. I mourned the man I lived with, day in, day out. Not the portrait in the hall, but the one who forgot our anniversary 2 years in a row. The one who called me woman more than he called me by my name. I served tea like I always did, Earl Grey, with 2 sugars if you were Grace, black if you were Tom. I still remembered how each of them took it. Funny how no one remembered how I took mine. No one asked. Linda patted my shoulder in the hallway and said, "He loved you so much." She said it like a rehearsed line, not a memory. I just nodded. What was I supposed to say? That love isn't always kind? That sometimes love forgets to come home on time? Or leaves bruises no one sees? The casserole sat on the counter untouched, steam rising into a kitchen that had seen more arguments than anniversaries. I opened the window. The breeze didn't care who had died. It carried on, brushing through the curtains like it always had. The kids were in the living room, grown now, but still somehow loud in the same ways. Rebecca sat on the couch where he used to fall asleep watching the news. She picked out a napkin like she wanted to be anywhere else. Jeremy offered to fix the leaking faucet like it was some kind of peace treaty. I told him it was fine. It wasn't, but neither was I. People say funerals are for closure. That's a lie. Funerals are for ceremony. Closure comes later, if it comes at all. Mine came in pieces that afternoon, in the way no one asked if I was tired, if I'd eaten, if I wanted a moment alone. I slipped away upstairs at one point, just for a minute, just to feel the quiet press of the bedroom walls around me. His shoes were still lined up by the bed, his jacket still hung on the hook. You don't realize how much space a person takes up until you have to walk around it. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the closet door. That's when I noticed the suitcase, old, green, and scuffed at the corners. I hadn't packed it. I hadn't even touched it in years. My heart thudded slow and dull, like it was trying to knock but not wake me. Inside were shirts he never wore, letters I never saw. One of them was to someone named Ellie. The handwriting was his, but the words weren't. Not for me. "You make me feel seen," he wrote. "With you, I can breathe." I folded it back and closed the lid. I didn't cry. Not then. I came back downstairs with a tray of lemon bars and no expression. No one noticed I'd been gone. They were arguing over who would keep the photo albums. Grace said she had more shelf space. Tom said he was the oldest. I said nothing. I've learned over the years that quiet is a power too. It makes people uncomfortable, makes them fill the air with words they don't mean. By 6 o'clock, the house began to empty. One by one, they kissed my cheek and whispered, "Call me if you need anything," like they meant it. I smiled and nodded. That's what you do. After the last car pulled out of the driveway, I stood in the doorway for a long time. The porch light flickered. It always did when it got cold. The wind had shifted. The trees swayed like they knew something I didn't. I walked back into the kitchen. The tea had gone cold. The lasagna sat untouched. I poured a cup for myself, finally, and sat in his chair. It creaked like it always had, like it was tired too. The clock ticked. The house settled. I breathed. And for the first time in a long while, I listened to the silence. It had something to say. I suppose I should have asked more questions back then, but when you're young and in love, or something that looks like it, you don't ask what's under your own feet. You just walk, mop, cook, and trust the roof over your head won't suddenly feel like someone else's. He handled the paperwork, always had. "Don't worry about it, sweetheart," he used to say, tapping the pen against the table like it was some mighty sword. He paid the bills, signed the checks, met with the banker downtown in his good shoes. I, on the other hand, made sure the pantry stayed full and the curtains were changed with the seasons. We used to laugh, about how he couldn't remember where we kept the baking soda. I thought it was cute then. Now it just, like the beginning of something I didn't see coming. The real surprise came a week after the funeral. The house was quiet again, not peaceful, just empty. Tom and Grace came over with folders in hand, not casseroles this time, just paperwork. Tom cleared his throat before he even sat down. That's how I knew it wasn't good news. That boy always had a tell, just like his father. "We've been talking to the lawyer, Mom," he began, eyes flicking to Grace, like she'd rescue him from the hard parts. "And there's something we need to clarify about the house." I folded the dishcloth in my lap, even though there was nothing to clean. "Go on," I said, like I didn't already feel the chill of something shifting. He placed the papers on the table like they were coasters and said it, flat and clean, like a fact, not a betrayal. "Your name isn't on the deed." I blinked. That's all, just a blink. No gasp, no argument, not right away. I think part of me already knew. It had been his house, technically, since we bought it. He got the loan. He signed the title. I signed the marriage certificate and started boiling rice. But "this is my home," I said, more to the cupboards than to him. Grace smiled that tight, pitying smile that never quite reached her eyes. "We know, and of course you can stay. We're just sorting the paperwork to make sure everything's clean for the estate." Clean, as if my entire life had been a spill on the floor. I looked around the kitchen, the one I'd painted yellow after Jeremy got chickenpox and needed cheering up. The cabinets I lined, the cracked tile by the stove I'd covered with a rug because he always said we'd fix it next month. "And what exactly does not being on the deed mean?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. Tom adjusted his watch. "It means, legally, you don't have ownership. But we're not pushing you out, Mom. Don't think that. We just need to handle things properly." Properly? I'd handled every illness, every birthday cake, every budget stretch with coupons and canned beans. But now, suddenly, I was improper, unfit to claim what my hands had worn down with care. I nodded slowly, not because I understood, but because I didn't want them to see me cry. After they left, I stood in the hallway for a long time, the echo of their footsteps fading, like I wasn't even in the room, like I was already gone. Later that evening, I pulled out the old shoebox from the top shelf in my closet, the one where I kept clippings, notes, odd little receipts. Inside was a Valentine's card from 1978, a grocery list with "buy milk for cake" scribbled in his handwriting, and a photo of me standing barefoot in front of the same kitchen they now told me wasn't mine. I pressed the picture to my chest. I wasn't angry yet. Not then. I was something worse. I was invisible. And here's the thing they don't teach you when you're young. Love can live inside a house without giving you the keys to it. I boiled water for tea, my hands shaking slightly as I gripped the handle. The cupboard door creaked open, the one he always said he'd fix. I held on to that sound for a second longer than I needed to. By the time I sat down, the tea had steeped dark and strong. I drank it black. No sugar, no milk. Just like my future. Stripped down, undecorated. I didn't sleep that night. I walked the halls, touched the walls, counted the steps from the front door to the back. 22, same as always. But this time, every step felt borrowed. Lisa called it downsizing, with that practiced smile she wears like lipstick. Not too bright, not too personal. She came in holding coffee and a clipboard, already measuring things with her eyes. "This place is too big for you now, Mom," she said, setting her latte on the piano no one's played since Jeremy moved out. I watched the cup leave a ring on the wood. She didn't notice. The house didn't feel too big to me. It felt exact, lived in, like a shoe that's taken the shape of your feet. It creaked in the right places. It groaned when the wind picked up. It kept me company in ways people no longer did. But Lisa, she had plans. Open floor plans, neutral walls, no stairs, something manageable. She said it with such certainty, like my life was a spreadsheet she needed to balance. I stood by the window while she walked from room to room, pointing at furniture like it was clutter, not memory. "This can go to Goodwill," she said of the armchair where I nursed all three of them. "And the china? You haven't used it in years." No, I hadn't, because no one came for dinner anymore. "Tom says the market's strong," she added. "We could get you into a nice little condo by fall." She made it sound like a favor. I didn't respond, just kept my hand on the curtain edge, rubbing the fabric between my fingers like it was rosary beads. She didn't see it, the quiet way I pray when I'm about to lose something. That evening, after she left, I sat in the dining room and stared at the dent in the wall from when Rebecca threw her shoe during a teenage tantrum. The mark was still there. I'd never painted over it. Funny what we choose to keep. I boiled water for tea and didn't bother with a cup, just stood in the kitchen with the steam in my face, breathing in the last of what still felt like mine. The next morning, boxes appeared. Lisa had scheduled a packing helper without asking. A stranger showed up with tape and labels and too much cheer in her voice. "This'll be fun," she said, opening drawers I wasn't ready to part with. She found old birthday cards and tried to hand them to me. "Keep or toss?" she asked, holding up one from Calvin with a drawing of a crooked cake. He was 6 when he gave it to me. "Keep," I said, but she'd already dropped it in the toss pile. They moved around me like I was furniture too, something to be relocated. Gently, respectfully, but definitely moved. That night, I lay awake in my room for nearly 40 years, and thought about the word downsizing. What does it mean to be downsized? To be shrunk into someone else's idea of manageable? Lisa wasn't cruel. She thought she was helping. That was the hardest part. She smiled while erasing me. A week later, I stood in the garage, staring at the donate pile. Boxes labeled in neat handwriting, linens, frames, mugs, Mom's Misk. I reached into it and pulled out a snow globe from our trip to Oregon. The water had gone murky, but the tiny lighthouse still stood. I shook it gently. Still snowed. I placed it back in the box, but not in donate. I started a new pile. Mine. Because somewhere along the way, I forgot that I could say no. I could say, this chair stays, that wall stays, that dent in the dining room stays. And if no one listened, then maybe it was time they learned how. The first time I sat alone at the table, I still poured 2 glasses of water. Habit, I told myself, not hope, just the muscle memory of being married, of always having someone opposite you, even if the silence between you was louder than conversation. I made tomato soup that night, from a can, nothing fancy, but I still set out the salt and pepper, the napkins folded like always. I still reached for his bowl first. That's when it hit me. There was no his bowl anymore, just dishes, just things. I put the second bowl back in the cabinet and told myself it didn't matter, but the soup tasted thinner after that. I tried not to cry. It seemed ridiculous, crying over soup. But it wasn't the soup. It was the empty chair, the sound of the clock ticking, the spoon clinking against porcelain, the way I didn't have to wait for him to finish chewing before I got up to clear the table. People ask how grief feels, and they expect something dramatic, wailing, screaming, collapsing on the floor. But mine came slow, in bowls and spoons, in empty chairs and lukewarm dinners. I still cooked for 2 for weeks, couldn't stop myself. I'd make enough rice for both of us, pour 2 cups of tea, lay out 2 forks. I told myself I'd eat the leftovers later, but I never did. Some nights I caught myself talking out loud. "Soup's hot tonight," I'd say, or "They're calling for rain tomorrow." It wasn't conversation. It was remembering how to use my voice when no one was there to hear it. I left the radio on in the kitchen for company, just the oldies station. The DJ's voice was too cheerful, but the static between songs filled the silence in a way I couldn't. I never liked eating alone. It makes every bite feel like work. One evening, Jeremy called while I was finishing a bowl of minestrone. "How you holding up, Mom?" he asked. I told him I was fine, that I'd made soup. He said, "That's good," like it meant something, like soup could mean I was okay. After we hung up, I stared at the bowl. I wanted to throw it, just to hear something break. Instead, I washed it gently, dried it carefully, put it back in the cupboard, still warm from my hands. Grief makes you tender with things, even when you're angry. I started using the good china some nights, just for myself. Why not? No one else was coming, and I was tired of waiting for special occasions that never came. One night, I lit a candle, sat at the table alone, and ate split pea soup and candlelight like I was someone worth showing up for. The house didn't feel any less empty, but for a moment it felt like I was choosing something, and that mattered. I stopped setting 2 places after a while, not because I forgot, because I remembered, because I finally admitted he wasn't coming back, and pretending wasn't making it hurt any less. I started buying single-serving meals, learning what a half loaf of bread costs, getting used to the smaller pot. But I kept his chair where it was, not out of denial, out of memory. It didn't feel right to move it just yet. I let the silence sit across from me, let it eat with me, let it listen to my breathing. Some nights I still talk, just a sentence or two. Did you see the sunrise this morning? Your damn tomatoes are finally ripening. Little things, things he'd pretend not to care about, but always did. And sometimes, when the wind brushes against the kitchen window just right, I imagine he's listening, not haunting me, just nearby, enough to hear the spoon when it clinks the edge of the bowl. Emma showed up on a Wednesday. No warning, no fuss, just a knock on the door and that soft, tilted smile she got from her mother, but never quite used the same way. She held a bouquet of daisies and marigolds, wrapped in brown paper like a gift for someone who'd been forgotten. "These looked like sunshine," she said, handing them over, "and I thought you might need some." I didn't need flowers, not really. What I needed was something harder to name. But I took them anyway, placed them in the chipped vase under the sink, the one with the little crack that still holds water if you tilt it just right. She didn't rush in, just stood there on the porch like she was waiting to be sure I wanted her inside. That alone nearly brought me to tears. "Come in," I said, finally. "I just made tea." She didn't ask for sugar or milk, just followed me into the kitchen and sat in the same chair her grandfather used to sit in, the one that creaks like it's telling a secret. I watched her eyes take in the room, the old curtains, the crooked picture frames, the radio humming low in the background. She didn't flinch or scroll or look bored. She just was. That's the thing about Emma. She doesn't fill the air, she makes space in it. We sipped our tea in comfortable silence, and then she asked the one thing none of them had bothered to. "Grandma, what was Grandpa's name?" I blinked, not because I didn't remember, but because no one had said his name out loud in weeks, months, maybe. "Alan," I said softly. He hated it when I called him Al, said it sounded like a used car salesman. She laughed, really laughed, not the polite kind you give elders when they say something you half hear. "Alan," she repeated, trying the name in her mouth like it was a new word. "He looks like an Alan. In the photo, I mean." She pointed to the picture on the windowsill, the one from our third summer together. He's holding a fishing rod and wearing a hat that doesn't suit him. I'm in the background, blurry, laughing at something he'd said. No one ever asked about that photo. Emma did. She asked what lake it was, who took the picture, what he used to cook on Sundays. I told her about his cornbread, how it always came out too dry but no one dared say so. We laughed, and for the first time in what felt like years, the laughter didn't feel borrowed. "You must miss him," she said quietly. "I do," I said. "And also, I don't." She didn't look surprised, just nodded, like she understood that grief isn't a straight line. We sat on the porch after that. The wind was soft, the marigolds on the table leaned toward her, like they knew she was something gentle. "I used to come here when I was little," she said, looking out at the yard. "I remember your swing, the one on the oak tree." "It's still there," I said, "just hidden under vines now." She stood and walked across the grass barefoot, like she'd done as a child, pulled the swing out from the leaves and sat on it like no time had passed. The ropes creaked, and the tree rustled, and something inside me loosened. She stayed for hours, asked about things no one remembered. The garden, the sewing machine, the bird that used to tap the kitchen window every morning like clockwork. And then, just before she left, she hugged me, tight, long, like she wasn't in a rush to be somewhere else. "Can I come back next week?" she asked. I nodded, not because I needed company, but because she was the kind that noticed. She didn't try to fix me, didn't offer advice or books or links to grief therapy. She brought flowers. She listened. She asked his name. That's all it took. A little noticing, a little remembering, a little grace. The sewing drawer had always been mine, tucked in the corner of the spare room, beneath the window that never quite shut right. It held thimbles, tangled thread, spare buttons, and fabric too small for anything useful, or so they assumed. No one ever asked about it. Tom once joked that I'd probably be buried with my sewing kit. Grace said the drawer was such a time capsule, the way people say it when they think it's charmingly outdated. But that drawer, it held more than scraps. It held the only version of the truth I could afford to keep. You see, after the funeral, after they told me I had no legal standing, no place on the deed, no say, I didn't argue, not out loud, because I knew something they didn't. I had my own paper trail. It started years ago, quietly. One afternoon when Alan forgot our anniversary again, and I sat on the porch with a glass of watered-down lemonade and a rising tide of ache in my chest. I didn't scream. I didn't even bring it up. I just made a decision. The next morning, I went to see a lawyer, a woman named Cheryl with calm eyes and a sharper pen than anyone gave her credit for. I told her everything about how the house was in his name, how the bills came to him, how I cooked, cleaned, raised the children, and still somehow didn't own the floor under my feet. She listened, really listened. Then she said, "Let's fix that." She helped me draft something binding. Alan didn't know, at least not then. But years later, I brought it to him, sat him down and said, "Sign this or don't expect another birthday cake from me ever again." He grumbled, called it silly, but signed anyway. Maybe guilt, maybe convenience, maybe love in his own crooked way. That's how my name ended up on the second deed. A silent copy, not the one in the county office, but one held with quiet authority, enough to matter if it ever came to it. And it did. After Lisa started boxing up my life, after Grace mentioned assisted living communities with brochures that looked more like waiting rooms than homes, I opened that drawer. Not to stitch or patch or repair, but to reclaim. The envelope was still there, still sealed, still holding the document they thought didn't exist. Alongside it, a letter Alan wrote the night before his heart gave out, the one I never showed them. It wasn't poetic. It was clumsy and full of run-on sentences, but he wrote my name 4 times, and every time it was spelled right. He said he knew he hadn't been fair, said he should have put my name on everything sooner, said if anything happened, they were not to bully me out of what I'd built. That was his word, bully. He must have known them better than he let on. He signed it shaky, but it was his handwriting. I knew every loop and drag of that pen like I knew the lines on my own palm. I placed the envelope in my lap and just sat there for a while. The hum of the sewing machine still faint in my memory, like it was waiting for me to mend something. The next morning, I called Cheryl, told her it was time. She arrived in a navy blazer and those same calm eyes. She held the envelope like it was gold. "They'll try to push," she said, "but this will hold." And it did. When Tom came by that weekend, talking about timelines and cleaning transitions, I slid the copy of the deed across the table. He stared at it like it was a riddle. "This isn't possible," he said. "It is," I replied, "and it's binding." Grace sat down without a word, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Lisa didn't speak at all, just turned her gaze to the hallway as if she could leave through silence. I didn't yell, didn't gloat. I simply poured myself tea and let the sound of it fill the room. They weren't angry, not exactly. They were stunned, because they thought I had nothing left. They forgot I had been quietly paying attention all along. They forgot I still knew how to sew, not just hems and buttons, but entire futures. The china cabinet wasn't even real mahogany. It was imitation wood from Sears, a wedding gift from Tom's parents. But to me, it held more than plates. It held a life I had tried to keep polished and presentable, even when everything else was falling apart. Lisa walked in with a notepad. Jeremy had the measuring tape. No hugs, no "how are you, Mom?" Just, "if you're really downsizing, I was thinking I could take the cabinet." As if it was an even trade, my leaving, her gaining. I watched them circle the room like auctioneers before the body's even cold. Lisa opened the cabinet, ran her finger across the glass like she was already dusting it in her own living room. "It's too good to give to Goodwill," she said. I almost laughed. Lisa never liked that cabinet, said it was dated, said it made the room feel too heavy. But now it was a statement piece. Tom's armchair was next. Rebecca mentioned it would be cozy in her reading nook. My reading nook was the corner of the guest room you were pushing me into, a room with no closet, no window that faced the sun, just a bed that didn't creak when you sat on it, because no one had sat on it long enough to matter. I didn't argue. I never did. But I stood in the kitchen after they left, fingers wrapped around my teacup like it was the last thing that still belonged to me. It was chipped, the same chip from the day Tom dropped it in the sink, rushing to answer the phone. Funny how I'd kept that cup, not for the tea, but for the memory of the man who once rushed for calls that came less and less for me. When you're old, they say, you need less space, less furniture, less say. But I've noticed, the ones who tell you that are always the ones who want more. Lisa came back the next day with bubble wrap and boxes. I'll just take it now while the truck's here. I looked at her, really looked. She had on lipstick too bright for morning and a gold chain I'd never seen before. Maybe a gift from her husband. Maybe something she bought herself now that they didn't share accounts anymore. Did you want to go through the drawers? I asked quietly. She paused, blinked. What for? Oh, just a few things. Letters, receipts, paper. Lisa didn't like paper, said everything should be digital. She didn't know that the bottom drawer held a folded note from her father, a grocery list scribbled in blue ink with a heart beside milk. She didn't know that tucked behind the saucers was the birthday card she made me in 3rd grade, spelling my name Mommy with 2 M's. She didn't want the memories, just the shape of them. So I let her take the cabinet. I didn't cry. I just stood at the door, hands clasped like I was greeting a neighbor instead of watching 30 years of my life roll down the driveway. They tied a rope around it like it might try to run. That night, I opened the sewing drawer, the one none of them had asked about. Inside were fabric scraps, yes, but also the deed to this house, in my name only, a copy of the new will, and the real heirloom, a letter, folded and addressed in handwriting none of them recognized. It wasn't revenge I felt. It was relief, like a secret had stretched its legs after being folded too long. The next morning, I made tea in the chipped cup, sat in the guest room they wanted me to call mine. I opened the window, even if it didn't face the sun, and I smiled, because they never asked what mattered to me, and now they'd never know what they left behind. Tom stood in the doorway, arms folded like he was waiting for applause. I cleared the garage out for you, he said, like it was a gift. And maybe it was, if you were a bicycle or a lawnmower. The smell hit me first, that damp, unfinished scent of cardboard and oil stains. The kind of smell that clings to your sweater and whispers that you're not meant to stay long. But there it was, a mattress, no bed frame, just crates underneath. A folding chair in the corner, one lamp, a plastic bowl and spoon on a shelf. You'll have privacy here, he added, like privacy was a consolation prize for being unwanted. I smiled, the way women my age are taught to smile, polite, tight. Thank you, I said, because what else do you say when your child offers you a garage like it's mercy? I sat on the mattress that night and listened to the house breathing above me. Footsteps, laughter, the television, dishes clinking, a life I used to live, now muffled, distant, like I'd died but they forgot to bury me properly. There were no windows, just a narrow slit high on the wall that let in a crack of sky if you stood on tiptoe. I did once, just to feel taller. Saw the neighbor's roof and a sliver of clouds. That was enough to make me cry. Quietly, of course. Always quietly. Tom brought me a tray the next morning, dry cereal in a plastic bowl, milk in a paper cup. I know it's not fancy, he said, scratching his neck, but, we've got 3 kids, and Lisa's hours were cut. I nodded. I knew all about being stretched thin, had stretched myself thin for decades, in fact, so thin I barely cast a shadow. He turned to leave, then hesitated. You're not mad, are you? His voice dropped like a boy caught doing something wrong. I'm grateful, I said, and it wasn't a lie. I was grateful. Grateful I still had my mind. Grateful I remembered who I used to be before I became an inconvenience with thinning hair and soft footsteps. I stared at the rafters that night, counting the cobwebs. They looked like threads of my old life, dangling out of reach. Sometimes I spoke to them. Silly, maybe, but when no one talks to you, you start talking to things that don't interrupt. One afternoon, I heard Lisa laughing on the phone upstairs. She was telling someone about the garage setup, said it was charming in a rustic kind of way. I pressed my hand to the ceiling. That's how close I was, close enough to hear her words, never close enough to be included in them. They brought Emma down once. She sat on the floor, cross-legged, like a little Buddha with scraped knees. "Why are you in here, Grandma?" she asked. I smiled and touched her cheek. "Because it's quiet," I whispered. She frowned. "I don't like it. It smells like tools." I laughed, a real one, the kind that caught me by surprise. That night, I pulled out the little box I'd kept hidden in the lining of my purse. A watch, Tom's old one, the one I saved from the junk drawer when he wasn't looking. It didn't tick anymore, but I wound it anyway. It reminded me that once we measured time by birthdays and holidays, not by how long until we were out of someone's way. The days bled together, no calendar on the wall, just sun through that little slit of glass and the sound of morning cartoons overhead. Sometimes I heard Emma's feet running, sometimes nothing at all. Tom came down one evening, rubbing his hands like he had something important to say. "We've been thinking." Those words, they always mean you weren't part of the thinking. "Maybe it'd be better if you had a place with more care, nurses, people your age." I looked up at him, slow and steady. He couldn't meet my eyes. "Would that be better for me or easier for you?" I asked. He shifted, picked at the edge of a cardboard box like it had answers. "I just thought, you should be grateful we've tried so hard." There it was, that word again. Grateful. The bandage they wrap around guilt. I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of a fight. A woman like me doesn't win arguments. We win by surviving them. When he left, I turned the lamp off, sat in the dark, hands folded, eyes open. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel small. I felt still, like the center of something they couldn't quite name. They thought it would be a formality, just a few papers to sign, a couple of nods, and I'd hand over what they wanted. The house, the land, the little bit of savings I'd hidden like seeds in different accounts. They sat there, Tom, Lisa, Rebecca, in that glass-walled conference room that smelled of fresh coffee and old betrayal. Tom straightened his tie like he was the one in charge. Lisa tapped her pen against the notepad she never used. Rebecca didn't even look up from her phone. They didn't notice I'd worn my church blouse, the one with the pearl buttons, or that I'd had my hair done. I didn't do it for them. I did it because power deserves a good collar. Mr. Danner, my lawyer, cleared his throat. He was younger than I'd have liked, but careful, and careful men make excellent allies. He opened the folder, pulled out the letter I'd handwritten months ago, edited, notarized, and now official. "I'll begin with Mrs. Alden's statement," he said, voice low but clear. Their heads turned, just slightly. They weren't expecting that. They expected forms, not a voice. He read slowly. "To my children, who have assumed much and asked little." I watched Tom shift in his seat. "You've taken comfort in thinking I am weak. That age means silence. That gratitude is a leash. It is not." Lisa's jaw twitched. She crossed her arms. "This home, bought with a teacher's salary and a war widow's pension, does not pass to you." That was when Rebecca finally looked up. I kept my hands folded in my lap, no emotion on my face. Just the warmth of the morning sun through the conference window, resting on my knuckles like an old friend. "The property is placed in trust for my granddaughter, Emma Rose Alden, to be accessed on her 25th birthday, or sooner, should she choose to pursue education in a field that requires compassion." Tom's voice cracked through the silence. "Are you kidding me? She's 10. Mr. Danner didn't flinch. "There's more," he continued reading. "You saw fit to give me a mattress on crates. You measured furniture while I was still breathing in the house. You fed me cereal like I was lucky to be fed." I glanced at Lisa. Her cheeks had turned a quiet shade of red. I'd warned her once. Quiet women remember everything. "This is not spite. It is correction." Tom stood up. "This is manipulation. She's been sick. She doesn't know what she's doing." Mr. Danner looked at me. "Mrs. Alden, do you wish to say anything?" I did. Not for them, but for me. I stood, slowly, as old bones do, and let the silence hang. They were so loud in my memory, so confident, so entitled. I took a breath. "I raised you with more than I had. I asked for dignity. You gave me convenience." I looked at each of them. "I cooked for you while I limped. I listened while you talked over me. I gave up my bed so you could visit. And then you put me in the garage." Rebecca opened her mouth, then closed it. I sat back down. That was enough. Mr. Danner passed around copies of the documents. Binding, legal, sealed. Tom muttered something about contesting it. Lisa said something sharp under her breath. Rebecca, to her credit, just stared at the floor. I left before the coffee was poured. Didn't need to stay for the part where they argued or accused. I'd said what needed saying. Outside, the air was cool. The wind pressed gently against my coat like a reminder that yes, I was still here, still standing. Emma was waiting in the car. She held my hand the whole drive home. Didn't say much. Just kept looking at me like I was something new. "Grandma," she finally said, "what did you write in that letter?" I smiled. The truth. There's something sacred about soil under the fingernails. It doesn't care how old you are or whether your knees ache when you kneel. It just asks that you show up, dig a little, water what matters. My garden isn't much to look at, not compared to those glossy magazine ones Lisa used to show me, but it grows. Tomatoes that split when they're too full, basil that tries to escape its planter, and marigolds, always the marigolds. Bright, stubborn little things that bloom even when they shouldn't. It's tucked behind the cottage I moved into after the house was settled, just 2 rooms in a patch of yard with a crooked fence, but it's mine. My name on the deed, my hands in the dirt. That kind of ownership feels different when it comes late in life. It feels earned. There's an old rocking chair I salvaged from a neighbor's junk pile. It creaks in all the right places, like Tom's father used to when he'd sit by the fire after supper. I fixed the leg with some glue and a prayer. Now it leans just enough to remind me I'm not trying to impress anyone anymore. Emma visits every Saturday, just like we agreed. She brings her little sketchbook and a pack of cookies she hides from her mother. We sit out back, watching bees flirt with the lavender. She told me last week, "You don't act like other grown-ups." I asked her what she meant. "You listen like you don't have somewhere else to be," she said, chewing her cookie slow. And I smiled, because she's right. I spent so many years being rushed, interrupted, dismissed. Now I listen like it's my favorite thing to do, because it is. I tell her stories sometimes, not always the whole truth, just the parts she's ready for. I told her I once had a red bicycle with a basket full of daisies, that I used to bake peach pies with her great-grandma on Sundays, that sometimes even grown-ups get scared and need someone to sit with them in the dark. She drew me once, sitting in my chair, wearing my sun hat, surrounded by flowers. She made my hands too big and my nose a little crooked, but she got my eyes just right, soft and a little tired, but still wide open. One afternoon, Tom called, said he'd been thinking about things, and maybe he and the kids could come by sometime. I told him, gently, that my garden wasn't a place for apologies rushed between errands, that healing takes time, and space, and silence sometimes. He didn't argue, just said okay, and hung up slower than usual. I didn't cry. I dug up a patch for snap peas that day, felt the sun on my shoulders, felt my breath, steady, felt, for the first time in a long while, settled. There's an old radio I keep by the back door, the kind with the knobs that crackle when you turn them. I play music sometimes, nothing fancy, mostly old jazz or soft violins, sounds that know how to wait for you. And in the evenings, I light a little candle and sit in the rocking chair with my tea. The garden quiets down, the marigolds close, the air shifts, warm to cool, like it's tucking the day in. And me, I sit still, not because I have nothing to do, but because I finally learned that stillness is its own kind of blooming. I wasn't invited to Jeremy's engagement party, not directly. Someone forwarded me the digital invitation, a bright, floral thing with gold script and a playlist link. Very modern, very impersonal. I stared at it for a long time, not because it hurt, not anymore, but because I remembered rocking him to sleep the week his mother went back to work too soon. His curls stuck to my shoulder, his breath like warm little feathers. And now, I was a shadow they tried to leave out of the pictures. But shadows have long memories and longer reach. I didn't call, didn't ask why. Instead, I went to the garden and clipped a few lavender sprigs, wrapped them in soft paper, tucked them inside a small box with a note. "Congratulations, Jeremy. May you always choose gentleness, even when it's not returned. Love, Grandma." I mailed it 2 weeks before the party, no return address, just my handwriting, the kind he used to recognize from birthday cards and lunchbox notes. Tom texted me later. Short, Jeremy got your gift. I could hear the unspoken question behind it. Why now? Why anything at all? I didn't reply, because sometimes the most powerful move is one that makes them sit with themselves. Lisa's daughter, Marin, graduated that same spring. Photos all over social media, cap and gown, balloons, a long caption thanking mom and dad for believing in her. Funny, I remembered sitting with Marin through multiplication tables while Lisa was out buying throw pillows. I didn't scroll long, just enough to find the address. Then I wrote the letter. Dear Marin, I'm proud of you. I always have been, even when we stopped speaking. Sometimes adults make decisions that have more to do with their own bruises than yours. You grew up anyway. That's what matters. Keep learning, keep soft. With love, Grandma. I imagined her opening it in her dorm room. Maybe she'd cry, maybe she'd fold it and hide it in a drawer, or maybe she'd show Lisa, and Lisa would sit down with a thud she didn't understand. Either way, the letter would stay. Paper has more patience than people. They didn't know what to do with me after that. Forgiveness, when it isn't begged for or demanded, confuses people because it leaves them nowhere to place their guilt. They can't dismiss you as bitter. They can't pretend they've won. I didn't forgive because they deserved it. I forgave because it let me rest. The anger had been useful once. It kept me warm in cold rooms, gave me something to chew on when dinner felt too silent. But gardens grow better without acid in the soil. Emma asked me one Saturday why I was writing so many cards lately. I told her, because love, when sent without strings, can still tie people together. She didn't quite understand, but she nodded anyway, the way she always does when I say something that tastes more like truth than sugar. I keep the responses in a box. Some are short, some say nothing at all, just names signed in shaky ink. One from Jeremy, just a postcard with a picture of the ocean. Thank you. I think I understand now. I don't need an apology. That's the part they'll never quite get. I just needed them to know I was still watching, still aware, still capable of grace that didn't come cheap. And when the wedding invitation arrived, yes, a real one this time, it sat on my table for 3 days before I opened it. White and gold, heavy cardstock. We would be honored to have you. I smiled, not because I was flattered, but because I knew they never expected me to say yes. Dear Emma, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, or gone enough that you finally opened the box. I hope you waited until the house was quiet, until no one was rushing you or explaining me away. This isn't a goodbye. This is the part I didn't get to say out loud. You've always been different, not just because you listened, really listened, but because you looked at me and still saw me. Not a burden, not a story already over, a person. That's why this letter is yours, not Lisa's, not Tom's, yours. I want you to know the things they'll leave out, the parts that won't fit into polite conversations or family albums. They'll say I was stubborn. I was. They'll say I held grudges. Maybe I did. But they won't say how I waited by the phone every birthday for a call that didn't come. They won't say how I learned to eat dinner in silence, pretending it was by choice. They won't say how I gave away pieces of myself and got crumbs in return. You'll hear things, that I gave the house away unfairly, that I was spiteful in my last years, that I made trouble when peace would have been easier. Don't believe everything they say, but don't hate them for saying it either. People lie when the truth makes them feel small. Here's what's true. I loved fiercely, even when I wasn't loved back. I forgave things that deserved rage. I made soup when I should have slammed doors. And when they tucked me away in the garage, I didn't cry because I was weak. I cried because I remembered a time when that same boy, your uncle, used to hold my hand crossing the street. People change. Sometimes they don't. That's not your fault to fix. I want you to live wide, not careful, not quiet, wide. Don't become someone who waits to be invited. Walk into rooms like your name belongs there. Wear red when the world expects beige. Sit with people who make you laugh with your whole chest. Plant things. Throw away the rule that says you can't start over at 60 or 70 or tomorrow. And love, my God, love. but not with desperation. Love like you're already whole. You don't owe your pain to anyone, not even family, especially not family. If one day you find yourself crying in your car before walking into your own house, leave. And if someone calls you difficult because you asked for kindness more than once, leave louder. I know this isn't the letter people expect grandmothers to write, but we've had enough recipes and crocheted wisdom. You deserve more than that. You deserve the truth in ink and breath and blood. There's a key in the bottom of this box. It opens the old blue trunk in the attic, the one with the faded ribbon tied around the handle. Inside is everything I saved: the deed, the original will, the letters they returned unopened, and a checkbook they never knew about, made out in your name. Do with it what you will. Build something, burn something, just don't waste it on guilt. I won't be there to guide you, but you won't need me like that. Because if you're reading this, then I already did the most important thing. I told you the truth. And once a girl has the truth, the world has to answer to her. I love you, Emma, not for what you did, not for what you'll do, but because you saw me when no one else bothered to look. And that kind of scene, it saves people. All my love, always, Grandma.